Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature, Oceans on the Move, How Marine Currents Foster Biodiversity, presented by Nat Hab Galapagos Expedition Leader, Josy Cardoso, and Galapagos oceanographer, Greg Aranea. It is such a pleasure to have you both with us today. Josy, I'm going to hand things off to you.
Thank you, Kendall. It's very nice to be another day here in Daily Dose of Nature, and thank you everybody to take an hour from your time. We apologize for the delay, but today the internet here in the Galapagos Islands is as fast as a giant tortoise. So you can imagine all the difficulties that we had. Therefore, we're not having the webcams on, otherwise we will not be able to move through the presentation. But hopefully some of you remember me from another trip, and some of you hopefully will get to know me in the future trips that you will do here and visit us in the Galapagos Islands. I'm so happy because I have a very good friend and colleague of mine. He's Greg. We grew up together here on these amazing islands. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about his background. He has a bachelor in geoscience from Florida International University and a master's degree in geographic information science from Denver University. So he's also an undersea specialist. He's a naturalist guide from the Galapagos Islands over 20 years. And well, with all that career, he's on his 40s. He's not as old as we think with all the things that he has done on his life. And I want to invite him to tell us a little bit about the currents, because he is the expert on that and how these marine currents foster biodiversity. So thank you, Greg, for being here.
Thank you, Josy. It's a pleasure for me to share, part of my life doing scuba diving and learning by myself at the beginning about the oceanography worldwide, and then focus a little bit more in what is exactly going on in this pristine ocean that surrounds the Galapagos Islands.
Great. Thank you, Greg, to be here. I'm just going to start moving at some point through the presentation. Okay, so I hopefully will get to see the first slide. I will actually ask Kendall to interrupt me if for some reason the next slide it doesn't show up, because the internet is it's playing against us today. But as you can see on your presentation, we have Greg. We know that all the continents are together, right? But can you tell us a little bit about what do you think of the oceans? Are they together? Is a single mass? How us, the human beings, can consider the mass of water that is surrounding all the continents?
Excellent question, Josy. Actually, this is one of those topics that we all have in our career as a naturalist. Many people have a misunderstanding the way we think, about the ocean. First of all, let's see this slide. And the map illustrates the largest, continuous land areas of the Earth. There you can see the continents are separated. If we talk about America or Africa, including Australia, Antarctica, they are all separated. Well, except, Europe and Asia, that they're still connected and is considered to be a supercontinent. But let's leave the geological part, aside, because now the main question here is, the continents are really separated? As we can see in the illustration, it is not. So the confusion here comes because this vast body of water, which actually covers 21% of the Earth, is geographically divided, with distinct names by regions. So just this happened in the past because to make easy for mankind to position themselves in a specific geographic location when we are talking of the ocean. So it's easy for you to locate yourself when I'm talking about the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean or the Indian Ocean, rather than telling you this part of the ocean, of the global ocean connection. So this slide shows that we have one global ocean, actually.
So we have one single mass of water, one single ocean. And so that means, Greg, that whatever we do in the Atlantic, for example, in terms of pollution, let's say you are polluting in the Atlantic, that will affect the Pacific Ocean at some point, right?
Absolutely. Wherever pollution occurs in one way or another, the whole global oceans get affected. Therefore, if we want a healthier ocean, we all humanity together, we have to make changes, in our lifestyle and the way we see the ocean. Because if we drop, let's say, 50 gallons of oil here in the Pacific Ocean in the Galapagos Islands, the currents eventually will take it away from the islands, but it will pollute somewhere else.
Okay, so here in this slide, the thermohaline circulation, it's what we're talking about, right? That at some point, all the currents, whether they're cold or warm, they're all interconnected, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's look at this animation. Now it's working. So with this animation, we can understand better how all oceans are connected and how the ocean conveyor system actually works. You can see in this animation all these little vectors or arrows that are on the surface. These are currents that are driven by the winds, but eventually, because they're heading north towards the poles, they will lose temperature, so the density will increase and start sinking. So far north or along the poles, the ocean water start diving into the ocean platform, and by density start traveling somewhere else. Always is from pole to pole. So all that cold water that is generated on the northern Arctic area eventually ends up in the Antarctic.
Thank you, great. So now we know that how the currents are being moved and why. And here my next question is, so Galapagos is crossed by the equator line. According to our understanding, or what anyone will think, coming to the Galapagos Islands should be tropical, warm, humid all year long. But when you arrive here, the reality it's different. And here we have two different seasons, cold and warm. Can you explain why we have two seasons with very different temperatures, even though we're crossed by the equator line?
Oh, Josy, this reminds me my 20 years of guiding in the Galapagos and having the same question every week by the people that is visiting us. Because most of the people that come to the Galapagos Islands get in shock when the tropical weather that they are expecting is completely the opposite. Well, in simple words, I can say that the Galapagos is located in a privileged geographic location where the weather is actually determined by the ocean currents that vary in strength depending the time of year. So in the Galapagos, the temperature ranges from about 69 Fahrenheit to 84. And that's, when you are walking on the fields, looking for the boobies, the giant tortoises. But in the water, it's actually a different story. The temperature could drop as low as 55 degrees. And in good time, when it's warm, it can go up to 85 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, that's quite impressive and dramatic how the water changes, plus all the humidity that we have here. So basically, can you, before we go more in depth about the seasons that we have and how our islands look in the different seasons that we have, Can you tell us a little bit which are the currents responsible of this dramatic change during the year in the Galapagos Islands?
So as I said, we are in a specific geographic location, and that makes it interesting because this is the meeting point of 7 major currents. But going back to your question, the current that actually determine the weather in the Galapagos are 2. We have the Panama current, and we also have the Peruvian current. These 2 currents, one is stronger than the other depending on the time of year. So that brings either big masses of warm water towards the Galapagos Islands due to the trade winds with the Panama current, which is present from December till May, or from June till November, big masses of water from the Peruvian current reach the Galapagos Islands.
Okay, so then that's when we can call our warm season and our cold season. So for example, people that do not handle well the weather, the heat actually, should come maybe between June and November. And then people that really likes warm weather will be here during December and May, right? Warm water, December through May, and cold water from July, June to November, right?
Yeah, absolutely. As you can see in this animation that is playing on right now, you can see the dramatic changes in the water temperature. So it started blue, which represent cold water, but actually when we have the northern trade winds coming down towards the Galapagos Islands, it brings these big masses of warm water from Central America towards the island. That is why it became completely red, the whole surrounding islands. Now in this slide is how the Galapagos looks between December and May. Green field with average temperature of mid-80 Fahrenheit. But this time of year is very important for a species that depends from land because of the abundance of food like finches and mockingbirds, warblers, land tortoises, land iguanas, and so on. It's so much food because it's a lot of rain.
Okay, and rain means food, and they reproduce like crazy, right?
Yeah, the more it rains, the more babies they have. On the other hand, in this other animation, which ran from June till November, we have the cold water arriving to the Galapagos Islands. Again, blue represents the cold water and green, very, very cold. The green is actually represented by the amount of chlorophyll that is released by the photosynthetic plankton that is arriving to the islands. This cold water, Josy, is so rich in nutrients compared to the Panama current. As we can see, this cold water from the south not only affects the Galapagos, but also the Ecuadorian coast, as well as the far north into Central America, which is great for fisheries. Now in this illustration that you have in your screen, this is the shocking landscape that people encounter when they visit us during the cold season. Brown and gray, very boring, so no very appealing landscape. However, because the water is super cold and rich in nutrients, a species that depends on the marine ecosystem, such as the famous blue-footed boobies, the cute sea lions, and the magnificent albatross, and many other birds that depends from the ocean, begins breeding. While the finches and mockingbirds and many other land species that I mentioned before are on hold because food is not available on land. Food is available in the water. And the responsible of that breeding behavior in the animals is due to the Humboldt current.
Great. Yeah, that's amazing. I really love, the both landscapes that we have in these two seasons, the berry green, that actually the berry green doesn't last that long. It's about 3 to 4 months, like the berry, all the leafy parts of the trees and plants. And then I really love this dramatic look that everything looks dead, but it's not. Actually, the plants are just in a dormant stage, right? Waiting for water to come and be able to bloom again. So this looks like a desertic or like a desert landscape when it's our dry, cool season. And we have a lot of incense trees in this slide presentation. That those white trees that look like dead, those are incense trees and they are not dead. As soon as the rain starts, February, you will see green right away. They have no time to lose. So in a matter of 2 weeks, the whole landscape changed from white to green. So going back to fully understand about the marine currents, can you let us know what are the forces or what drives the currents to move, right? Because they move from north to south, from south to north, from east to west, from west to east. So explain us why or how they move.
All right, so let's look at this other animation, and this is actually representing the directions of the trade winds, which are the responsible of the why the Panama or the Humboldt current is present in the Galapagos Island. So depending on the ocean currents, the driving forces could be either the winds or density. In the particular case of the Galapagos Islands, the superficial currents that we know as Panama and Humboldt, their driving forces are the trade winds. In this animation, we can observe that the northeasterly trade winds that influence the Panama current and the southeasterly trade winds that act on the Humboldt current. You can see a very clear boundary. You can see a very clear boundary north of the Galapagos Islands where these trade winds converge. So now you can see the dashed line. The boundary where these winds converge are nowadays known as the intertropical convergence zone, known by the sailors, back in the early 1900s as the doldrums or the cons, because this is a monotonous, windless weather.
Yeah, that's amazing, right? And that's actually why a lot of those that's how the islands were discovered by the Spaniards, right? In 1535, they were going from Panama to Peru to solve some problems, but unfortunately they hit the doldrums, no wind, and they were dragged actually by the currents all the way to the Galapagos, right?
Yes, indeed. And it is amazing because it took the Bishop of Panama, Tomás de Berlanga, only about a week to reach the Galapagos Islands. And that was due to the Panama current.
Yeah, and well, nowadays also we know that a vegetation raft that starts floating from the mainland to the Galapagos usually takes 2 weeks to arrive about 1,000 kilometers or 600 nautical miles, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's actually a fair short trip for all of these species that want to colonize the islands. But the main deal is who can survive 2 weeks without water, right?
Absolutely. Who can survive without water and food? So, Josy, besides the two major currents that controls the weather in the Galapagos Island, we don't have another important float that makes the Galapagos weather not to be extremely hot, but rather humid. So when we have the Panama current, temperature can even go farther than 85 Fahrenheit. But because of this other presence of water that is surrounding the Galapagos Islands at the same time, the weather here is pleasant during the hot season. This is a submarine current that is known as Cromwell, which is about 185 miles wide and about 13 miles thick. So you for you to have a better idea, this is wider than the widest part of the Mississippi River, that is about 12 miles. So can you imagine that big mass of water that is 300 feet under the surface reaching to the Galapagos Islands? So this white, thick, dense, cold mass of water flow eastward along the equator. And this, in this particular case, since it's a submarine current, the trade winds do not play any major role in the motion of the big mass of water. Here we are talking about density.
Great. So that will be the Cromwell current that is the responsible of bringing all the nutrients from the very bottom of the ocean, hits the Galapagos platform, and then we have the upwellings that later on we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. That's incredible. Currents that are driven by the winds, and currents that are driven by density from very, very deep on our ocean.
Yes, absolutely. As you can see in this bathymetric map, west of the Galapagos Islands is a very steep platform. So when the Cromwell current, which is coming between 300 to 1500 feet deep, hit the Galapagos Islands, as you said, and then it brings all these nutrients towards the surface of the ocean that is surrounding the Galapagos Islands.
Yeah, that's incredible, because sometimes when we're doing, panga rides along the coast of Isabela or Fernandina, we always mention to our guests, not even 50 meters, that would be 150 feet away from the coast, it should drop. Actually, it drops dramatically, about 3,000, 4,000 feet, as you can see in that map. I really like this map over here, but because you can really notice how deep it gets, and also how the islands are connected to each other due to the Galapagos platform. So now that we have a better understanding of how the nutrients arrive, can you explain us a little bit about what upwellings means?
Well, let's make it very simple. Upwelling is a process in which deep, cold water rises towards the surface. So if the water is 300 feet, from those 300 feet, something forces it to get to the surface. And this is a very important process, because the water that rises to the surface as a result of the upwelling is typically rich in nutrients. Thus, these nutrients work like a fertilizer, so the surface water get fertilized and creating a high biological productivity in these regions. So if we look to the illustration or to the slide, you can see some blinking in there, which is green. Look at the big mass, green big mass that is blinking west of the map of Galapagos, Isabela, Fernandina. So these are super high productive region. This is a place where you have higher probability to find marine megafauna, like whales and manta rays and dolphins. So it's better chances for you to find those kind of animals there because of the high productivity. But because this current of submarine current, Cromwell, is so wide, not only affect that particular region, but it engulf all of the islands, and in the steep areas start upwelling as well, like a north of Santiago, north of Santa Cruz, north of the islands, some areas in Floriana, Isabela, and Española as well.
So due to your explanation, now we can say that Galapagos does not have blue, clear waters all year long to do a snorkel, right? And that's something that often happens when people comes here. We get in the water and water is murky, but it's not because it's polluted. It's actually all the nutrients that you are talking about that comes all the way from the western side and hits the platform, comes up, and that's all the murkiness. And it's all actually life. It's the base of the food for all of the little species and later on for the animals that you have mentioned. So yeah, when you come to the Galapagos, do not expect to have clear water like the Caribbean. That's not our strength here in the Galapagos. What is beautiful here that you don't have in other places is these big animals snorkeling with you, like sea lions being very playful, penguins flying underwater, marine iguanas. You have all these creatures that are fearless swimming around you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the responsible is this current Cranwell, and you know, this is a place, as you said, where at the same time you can do snorkeling with penguins, sea lions, beautiful tropical fish, as well as whales or, you know, sharks if you don't get scared of them, and mantas. And that is due to the high productivity. I don't know how to say this, but it's not really exactly a specific time of year when this is going to be murky or no. It just depends on luck. Dwellings is not something that is determined by the moon or by us. It just happens. It could happen during the warm season. It could happen during the cold season. It happened mostly during the cold season because of all this mixing with the Humboldt current. But again, don't get disappointed. That is not crystal clear blue water, because the majority of the life that you really enjoy in the Galapagos Islands are actually on land. So if we don't have that murky water, then you won't have the blue-footed boobies perching on the rocks all along the shorelines of the islands. You won't have the penguins here in the equator. You won't have the sea lions barking at you when you are swimming around or walking around. So it is a unique situation. All these animals congregate here in Galapagos is because these nutrients. This is like an oasis in the middle of the ocean. They don't go anywhere else. They stay all year round here. So there is not a good time of year to come to the Galapagos Islands. It's all year round. We have the blue-footed boobies, the penguins, and many other species present on the islands.
Yeah, that's great. And also, I remember seeing a documentary about a scientific documentary where it looks, Greg, that when it rains in Papua New Guinea, all that rain, it washes all the nutrients, all the dirt of the islands there, and reaches the ocean. Those nutrients sink in the water very deep, and they ended up over here in the Galapagos Islands. I mean, for me, it's mind-blowing that, again, we are all connected. We are one single world, and we have to be careful what we do. Because imagine, all those nutrients that come to the Galapagos Islands are coming from Papua New Guinea all the way. So as you were mentioning to me also the other day, it's not only the nutrients from the soil, but also the animals, right? The dead animals.
Yeah, absolutely, Josy. This is a cycle, like a cycle of life. Nothing in nature gets wasted. Everything is recycled. As you said, all the decaying matters travels from the mountains, let's say from a place where big mountains, to the shore, getting into the ocean. These nutrients then flow or sink, but no matter what, they travel throughout the ocean due to the ocean currents, reaching every corner of our planet. All biological life at some point will add nutrients to land or to sea. For example, guano, we might say it's just bird excrement, but in fact, in the 19th centuries, played a very important role in the development of modern farming. Guano was used as a fertilizer because of the high content of nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium, which are nutrients very essential for plants to grow. Thus, when birds' excrement get washed by the rain, in nature, it supports bacteria, fungi, invertebrates, and vertebrates along the way that they are traveling.
So land and sea are connected, as you have been mentioning all these 30 minutes that we've been talking about the importance of marine currents here on the islands. The good thing is that we still have a little bit more of time, and you as an expert diver here in the Galapagos Islands, we have also a little place that it's called heaven, right, for sharks, whale sharks, dolphins, manta rays, that is called Darwin and Wolf. Is the heaven for the divers. So we do not only have people that comes on a regular cruise to visit the islands and do snorkel, but we have the live on board boats where divers come for 8 days to do diving every single day, like 4 times a day, like crazy, to see these humongous animals. What happens? Darwin and Wolf are a little bit far away from the Galapagos map. Over there, why it keeps, why the ecosystem is perfect for all these sharks to be around?
Well, whale sharks are not here in the Galapagos Islands all year round. They are traveling actually between the Galapagos Islands, the coast of Peru, and also Cocos Islands. So they are in all these areas, and they are following what I explained you before, upwelling regions. They're looking for all that food. But the northern islands, Wolf and Darwin's, is like a paradise, as you said, for the divers, because in certain months of the year, all that richness of nutrients arrives to the area. So it's a lot of food. It's a perfect place for, protect themselves from predators and so on. So that particular area, we have a big biomass of hammerhead sharks and these humongous whale sharks that we have beautiful encounters, especially between June to November. And guess what? June to November is when the Humboldt current is present here. So that makes sense why the whale sharks are present in this particular place. So we have seen that ocean currents play a major role not only for the animals, but also plays a major role in the global climate system, as well as the worldwide distribution of nutrients. But we should be more cautious how we coexist with nature. Josy, wrong actions will have a negative effect in nature that could not be reversible. In this small archipelago, we can see a clear example how codependent are land and sea. Is the marine productivity decline? As a consequence of that, the land biomass or biodiversity that we have on the islands will decline as well, because they are connected. They need each other. So I invite everyone to think about how we live, what we are contributing to our wonderful planet Earth.
Yeah, and little actions. I know that for some reason we, as an individual, will be so difficult, or it seems so far away that we can change the world's mind of how people treat our planet Earth. But as single individuals, we can have little actions that make a big impact. For example, just stop using plastic bottles, for example, and get
water flask.
Yes, a water flask, right? So in our lifetime, you can count that we have reduced hundreds of plastic bottles that at the end actually ended up in the ocean. One of our major concerns nowadays here in the Galapagos Islands are all the plastic that is coming from other countries, not even us, polluting our waters, but from other parts of the world, from talking all this time. So currents do not only bring nutrients that will create this unique and pristine ecosystem, but also currents bring a lot of garbage that from other parts of the world. So please, everybody, let's start making little changes on our daily routines, and we can make a big impact in the future. Maybe not for us, but for our future generations. Marine currents are going around the world and bringing, as we say, nutrients, but also a lot of garbage. And that garbage will impact very badly on our marine and land animals. So Kendall, I will hand it to you. If you have any questions, we are here to answer them.
Great, thank you so much. We do have questions for you, and I'd just like to remind everyone before we get to the Q&A, if you have a question for Josy or Greg, you can submit those in your control panel under the questions field. Okay, first question. Is there any real-time monitoring of the major ocean currents using buoys and satellite links?
Sorry, Kendall, may you repeat the question again?
Sure. Is there any real-time monitoring of the major ocean currents using buoys and satellite links?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of sensors through satellites that are, reading all the motion of the currents, as well as they, trips conducted by different countries. For example, in the United States, we can say NOAA is in charge of that with all these instruments, collecting all the data that they need. And they are not only collecting data like speed of the currents and the direction of the current, but as well, salts dissolved in the water, oxygen content, electricity.
Okay, great. So there was someone who was in the Galapagos recently, and they heard that the water was warming and the fish that the penguins eat were disappearing, which could affect the penguins. So are they struggling at this point because of the warming waters?
Well, that is a topic that is very hard to really explain in the Galapagos Islands. For example, recently, we're talking about just 2 weeks ago, it was very warm. And before those 2 weeks, we have cold weather. It was roomy here, super cloudy. The water was super cold. And then suddenly it warms up. And then this past week, it cools down again. So here we have these constant changes in the ocean, and that is due to the upwelling. So we have 2 weeks ago, we have an upwelling, and then boom, a lot of nutrients present on the surface of the ocean. The penguins were happy. But it would, to measure the change in the water patterns anywhere, let's say here in the Galapagos Island, that is a long-term study. We need a time series to know exactly what is going on. So penguins are doing well right now. Actually, I was talking to this professor from the University of Washington who is studying penguins in the Galapagos Islands. And in his recent field trip in the Galapagos Island, he counted more penguins than before. So penguins are doing okay, as well as some inventory of the population of the marine iguanas, which also depends from the cold water of the ocean, are doing okay. So we don't really know at this point if the wildlife in the Galapagos Islands that depends from the ocean is actually struggling to survive. Is a big question mark that we're still having. Hopefully, we will know for the near future.
So in order to benefit an area, how long does an upwelling need to last?
Wow. Well, the speed of the Conveyor current is about 10. Just to have an idea, it's about 10 centimeters per second. So once this water reach the surface of the ocean, it will last for a week or 2 weeks. It depends how big the big mass of water upwell.
Okay, in terms of identifying nutrients from other places, like you mentioned New Guinea, when and how is it discovered that certain nutrients are coming from other places?
Well, you know, every animal have a molecular signature. You know, it's like I'm part geologist as well, and I can do studies of if I want to identify, you know, the shells that compose the white sand beaches in the Galapagos Islands. I have to do a deep study in detail, trying to find out where those shells come from, because they are not from the Galapagos Islands. So it is similar with nutrients, and because of the Papua New Guinea is just, you know, on the Western Pacific. So because of the submarine current, the Conveyor current is how it reached the Galapagos Islands, because from the ocean surface they cannot get to the islands, but actually in the submarine way they can do it. So it's basically a signature.
Okay, great.
Like human's footprint, fingerprint.
So there was a request to identify what is on the screen right now in each of these circles.
Okay, we have at the top left, we have a flower. There is the Galapagos cotton plant that looks like a hibiscus. Below that yellow flower, we have a lava cactus. That one is actually one of our pioneer plants. Then we have below the lava cactus, we have a ladybug. But if you can notice that ladybug has no spots. So that's how we recognize our endemic ladybug. Then we had a ladybug that was introduced in order to do a biological control on our plants, on our mangroves, on our leatherleaf due to an aphid that was attacking them. So we had to introduce a ladybug that has spots. Then we have, let's keep going to the right-hand side of the ladybug. We have our beautiful Galapagos penguins. It's not the smallest, okay, of all the penguins, but it's very small. And I don't know if you see the little dots. Some of the dots of the penguins we can tell apart. You know, it's also like a signature that they have, and then we can track them. Above the penguin with the yellow beak, we have a waved albatross. There is also another endemic seabird on the islands. That waved albatross is only found on Española Island. And also for birders, if you really want to see this bird, actually they arrive from April all the way to December. And then when it gets really hot, as Greg mentioned it, water warms up, the amount of food drops down, so they go for 3 to 4 months to southern latitudes looking for food. And then they will come back to the Galapagos when the ocean's currents, you know, the Humboldt current, the Peruvian current is arriving, bringing nutrients and food for them. Then we have the giant tortoises, our most iconic animal of the islands. We have on several islands these beautiful giant creatures that can live over 100 years. Below that one, we have the bird with a red eye-rim, and that's a swallowtail gull. Also, it's here present on the islands all year long. And one thing that is very unique about this swallowtail gull is that it's active at night. It looks for food at night. And during the day, you can see them on their nesting places, on the ground, you know, looking for a mate or incubating the eggs or taking care of the chicks. And then we have the marine iguana that is below the gull. That's also another endemic species. It's the only marine iguana that feeds underwater. So when the water is cold, a lot of algae grow. and the algae is the main source of food for this reptile. So it holds its breath, reduces their heartbeat, and actually dives down in order to eat the algae that sticks on the rocks. And then we have a land iguana that also, this one in this case stays all the time on land and will feed primarily from the opuntia, that is our prickly pear cacti. So those are the animals that we have on the screen.
Great.
And then we have
wonderful fish. Look at those colorful fish. So because of the current, you know, the fish that we see now they're showing up are actually from 3 different provinces that we know. From Central America, we have also from South America, and believe it or not, if we look all the way to the left side of the screen, we can see butterfly fish. Guess from where they come from the Indo-Pacific. So that far they have reached the Galapagos Island, they have established here, and it's because they can find food all year round in this pristine place.
Amazing. They're all so beautiful and diverse. Okay, so Josy, you mentioned the term pioneer plant. Can you define that for me?
Sure. Pioneer plants are the first plants that were able to arrive here. We were talking about how, how a vegetation raft takes about 2 weeks to come here. On that vegetation raft, at the top, you can have animals, different type of, animals like reptiles, mammals, but you also can have plants. That's one way that they arrive. Also, a lot of them arrived on the, like hitchhiking on a seabird's feather, those seeds. So those first plants that were able to survive that journey, whether it was flying on the feathers of a bird or floating on the ocean like the mangrove seed or on top of a vegetation raft, arrived to the islands. That's 50% of the hard work. The other 50% will be trying to establish on a very arid area. So imagine you arrive here and you arrive in our dry season, that there is not a single drop of water. But anyhow, those plants were able to survive and manage to grow. So that's what it means, pioneer. The first ones to arrive and be able to survive, because a lot of them arrived, but not all of them were able to be successful, survive, and be able to be here until these days.
But not only that, Kendall, it's also colonizing new form land, like the lava cactus that was presented in the previous slide. That cactus grows on new lava. So let's say we have a volcanic eruption a couple of months ago, and then suddenly lava, you see this cactus growing on that lava. It's just bare rock, but the lava cactus managed to survive in that particular area with their roots breaking down through the lava and getting the nutrients from that new landform. Is not that amazing?
That's incredible. And a question just came in. Do you still see vegetation rafts that arrive from distant places?
Yeah, over and over we see, actually we see more these vegetation rafts arriving to the Galapagos Islands between December till May, when we have the Panama current arriving to the Galapagos Islands. It's actually one of the, because the nearby of the Central America towards the Galapagos Island. So for this raft or for a species to arrive to the Galapagos Island, it's faster to come from the north than from the south. That explains why we have more species that represent in the ocean from the north than from the south. So we have over 50% of the species of fish that are actually from Central America region, and only about 8% from the South America, Peru and Chile region. So we see that over and over, these three rafts But more than to rough, we see, unfortunately, a lot of plastic. And local scientists now are, it's not really scared, but concerned about the plastic pollution because they have identified a lot of invasive microorganisms that get attached to this plastic and reaching the islands. So now we are concerned about the microorganisms as well.
Wow. Okay, going back to temperature variations, how does the aquatic wildlife adapt to such quick and wide temperature variations in the Galapagos?
Well, this temperature variation happens all the time in the Galapagos. In times of plenty food, they say that they eat a lot, and in times of the food is too short, is scarce, then they will be eating less. But let's put as example the penguins. When the food is available around the nesting sites, they're just eating and eating and eating and eating, and they spend more time on land than in the water because of the abundance. So they get chubby and so on. So during the warm season, the fishing trip of these animals have to be longer. They even spend during the nighttime fishing, looking for food. So they survive by their reserve as a fat that they have stored during the time that is plenty food, but during the time that is very little food, that is what they have.
And sort of related to this, what impacts have you seen from climate change to these traditional current flows and temperatures?
Well, that is quite difficult to measure. With the climate changing, we haven't. It's not really a gradual change. But what I can say is, for example, when we have El Niño phenomenon, which is times when the warm weather stayed in the Galapagos Islands for over a year, we have a high mortality. Now you know that the warm weather doesn't favor the marine ecosystem. So it's less food in the water, and it's very hard for animals like penguins or marine iguanas or albatross or frigates or pelicans, boobies as well, to find the food. And then is when we have this, terminology, only the strongest survive, and they are adapted to change. But here in this particular case, during El Nino, it's not really the ones that adapt, because it's just an extreme change that happens suddenly. So it's actually the one that has been adapted to the very little food that is available that survive. For example, which one will die first? Smaller birds or larger birds? Obviously larger birds, because they eat more. They need to eat more to sustain the energy that they need. While the smaller ones, we have more chances to survive because of the less food that they require for surviving.
So basically, also in order to add a little bit on what Greg mentioned, climate change, as we know, what it's making is our weather crazy. We don't know when it's going to be warm, or we don't know when it's going to be cold, or suddenly it changes. And the problem is that maybe these changes will be more often, and our animals or plants have been able to adapt to have El Nino year, every 8 years or 9 years, or an X amount of years. Is enough time for them, the ones that survive, to reproduce, to have babies, and to create new generations. But if you have global warming and these events happen more often, then the time that they have, it will be so little that they will not be able to reproduce. And at some point, the species will become extinct. But as Greg said, that's something that we will have to still study. And we don't have clear results now, but very probable that that's what's going to happen in the future if we start having these extreme events more often.
Okay.
And definitely, because it will become warmer. Here it's not going to be the opposite. It's going to be warmer rather than colder. So another example, we know that the sex of the reptile is determined by temperature. So if we have warmer temperature, all the sex of those babies are going to be
females.
Will be just females. And where are the males to fertilize the eggs? We won't have. So that will lead also to extinction.
That's fascinating. There's so much tied to it that I wouldn't normally have thought of. Okay, last question I'll take for today is for Greg specifically. What made you want to become an oceanographer?
That reminds me, I have to go back to my childhood. Actually, I was a little kid, just doing as much as I can here at the pier, swimming, and then, over the time, the population in the Galápagos start growing up. We have more often ships, cargo ships specifically coming to the Galapagos Islands. So I saw the pollution that they were creating. And that made me wonder at that point, when I was only about 12 years old, if it was safe or healthy to swim in that water, in the bay. And so then is when my passion for the ocean was awake. Then I became a scuba diver. So I started diving. I was teaching myself more about the ocean over and over and over. So that was just really a passion that is still growing from my childhood until I was able to pay my way into school and move to the States to study oceanography.
That's so great. Well, it is the top of the hour, so I'm going to call it there with questions. And I'd like to hand it back to both of you for closing comments. So we'll start with Josy.
Yes, thank you so much again for taking an hour of your time to join us in this daily dose of nature. There is always fascinating to learn new things. And thank you, Kendall, for the invitation. And I would like to thank my very good friend, Greg, also for taking the time and explain us in what he loves the most, the ocean.
And Greg?
So thank you, everyone. Thanks, Josy and Kendall, for the invitation. It was a pleasure. Hopefully, I help everyone, in our audience to understand a little bit more about the ocean, how to be, more concerned about what we do in our daily basis, in our lifestyle, what we consume, and so on. Because we are not only affecting the place where we live, but somewhere else as well. I invite you to, to join us here in the Galapagos Island in the future, and hopefully with someone of our audience, our roads will cross on the islands where you are led by this expert, Josy Cardoso.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kendall.
Thank you both, Josy. It's a pleasure as always. And Greg, it was such a treat to have you with us today. Thank you for spending your time with us. And my thanks as well to everyone who tuned in today. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. We did record today's presentation, so we'll have the replay available on our website soon. And with that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great week.